I never imagined sharing this, but life always hides its strangest truths in silence. My name is Elise. 44 years folded into me like pages pressed too tightly together. Some nights I still hear echoes of laughter that used to live in this house, my son's voice, his music bleeding faintly through the walls. Lenny. 22 now. But sometimes, in the half-light between waking and sleep, I still see him as a child, the boy with tired eyes who once thought I could fix the world for him. That night was colder than most. The house felt hollow, like it had forgotten how to breathe. He said he wasn't feeling well, just exhaustion, maybe. I told him to rest. The blanket I threw over him was thick, heavy, the same one that used to smell faintly of lavender when he was small. I remember the sound first, the hush of his breathing. Then the stillness. I lay beside him, not out of need but out of some instinct that mothers never unlearn. To make sure he was warm. To make sure the silence didn't swallow him whole. Time slipped. Or maybe it folded. I don't know which. At some point, I stopped knowing where the blanket ended and where the air began. I only knew the warmth, human warmth, the kind you can't replace with lamps or memories. His hand twitched once in sleep. The movement startled me, not because of what it was, but because of what it reminded me of. Every night I stayed awake through his fevers, every storm he slept through on my chest. Every moment when love was simple, but that night, it didn't feel simple. There was something else, an ache that had no name. The ache of time, maybe. The ache of realizing how quickly life drifts away. I wanted to speak, to fill the quiet with something ordinary. But the words caught somewhere between thought and throat. Silence became the only language we had left. In the dark, I imagined his face soft with sleep, untroubled by the years that have already begun to bend me. I wondered if he knew how much of myself I had poured into him. How much of my youth was buried in his growing up. The longer I lay there, the stranger the world felt, as if I had slipped out of the present and into some parallel life where warmth was both comfort and punishment. I told myself it was nothing. Just fatigue. Just memory leaking through time. Just the echo of old tenderness wearing a new, uncertain shape, but the feeling lingered. Not desire, not anything as simple as that. Just a desperate, wordless need not to be alone in the vast, cold universe of adulthood. When morning came, sunlight broke through the curtains like forgiveness. Lenny was already awake, making coffee. He smiled, that soft, ordinary smile that had once been my anchor, and for a moment, I wondered if he'd felt it too, the strange shift in gravity, the fleeting sense that love, when stretched across years, can become something unrecognizable yet still achingly human. The night never ended. It only folded in on itself. Sometimes I think it's still that same night, stretched thin over years, whispering back to me in fragments. Lenny was beside me, or maybe just the memory of him. His outline flickered between the man he'd become and the boy I used to hold when storms scared him. I couldn't tell which version of him was real anymore. Maybe both were. Maybe neither. The room was a slow breath, expanding, collapsing, remembering. I could hear the faint rhythm of his breathing. It merged with mine until I didn't know who was comforting whom. He said something softly, or maybe I only imagined his voice. It wasn't a word I recognized, only a sound that carried warmth and apology and time. I closed my eyes. The past slid against the present. The air between us shimmered, thick with unspoken things. Guilt? Love? Fear? Or just the weight of being seen after too many years of pretending not to need anyone. I wanted to say something, to make the silence smaller, but the words refused to be born. My throat tightened. My hands trembled with every memory they'd ever held. Fevers cooled, scraped knees bandaged, tears wiped from a child's cheek. All the invisible ways love leaves fingerprints on the soul. When I finally looked at him, his face blurred, a collage of time. The freckles of childhood, the furrow of adulthood, the exhaustion of everything that had passed between. He smiled, awkwardly, tenderly, maybe apologetically. I didn't mean to make things strange, he said. Strange. That word echoed like an open door. I realized then that what I was mourning wasn't the awkwardness between us, but the distance time had built. The child I once knew had grown into someone who no longer needed my arms, only my understanding. I reached out, instinctively. My hand met his shoulder. Warm. Familiar. Real, everything's fine, I whispered. We're fine. He nodded. But his eyes were somewhere else, maybe remembering, maybe escaping, and I sat there, in the heavy quiet, aware that love changes shape when you're not watching. It stops being gentle, becomes strange. Stops being a promise, becomes a memory that night didn't end. It only changed form, into a silence that still breathes when the house goes dark. The knock that broke the silence, the doorbell is a fracture in time. The sound too sharp for the hush we had built. I remember turning, maybe slowly, maybe not at all, to look at him. His eyes, tired and unreadable, followed me like a question I didn't know how to answer. It's okay, I said, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to, him or the ache inside me that had grown too loud. We've just been alone too long, that's all. It makes everything feel strange. The word strange hung between us like fog, visible, shapeless, unyielding. Then, the doorbell again. Reality, impatient. When I opened the door, the cold rushed in. So did Mark, or at least the idea of him, neighbor, warmth, voice, the familiar presence that belonged to the outside world. He smiled. The kind of smile that pulls you briefly out of yourself. Thought I'd check on the heating, he said. Cold night. Cold night. Always a cold night in this house, I nodded, though my hands were trembling slightly. Not from the cold. From the lingering weight of what silence does to people when they live inside it too long. Behind me, I could feel Lenny, or maybe the shadow of him, standing still in the hallway. I didn't turn, but I could feel his attention, dense and unreadable, like heat from a candle behind glass. Mark's voice filled the air with small things, questions, laughter, fragments of a world that still turned, still moved. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I lied. Everything's fine. But I could feel the house disagreeing, its walls heavy with something unsaid. When Mark crouched to check the heater, the room seemed to bend. Lenny's reflection appeared faintly in the window, tall, still, eyes that didn't belong to a boy anymore, or maybe never had. Something unspoken passed through the space, not desire, but displacement. Like realizing you no longer belong in your own life. Mark stood, smiling again. You know where to find me if you need anything. His words lingered even after the door closed. The silence afterward wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier, older. I turned, slowly this time, and saw Lenny in the hallway. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, as if he'd been waiting for the world to reset, but it hadn't. For a moment, I thought I saw his younger self flicker across his face, the boy who once cried over broken toys and lost things. The boy I thought I could protect from everything. Now, I wasn't sure who needed protection. I took a deep breath. The air didn't move. The clock had stopped. Even time, it seemed, didn't want to interrupt us anymore. The weight of unspoken things the hallway swallowed sound. Lenny's door closed, but the echo lingered, hollow and metallic, like the house was holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, watching the silence form around his absence. He'd crossed his arms before he left, a shield, a wall, or maybe a cry for distance. I couldn't tell anymore. Sometimes I think silence has shape, something you can touch if you stay still long enough. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the blanket cold against my hands. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, lines I hadn't earned yet, eyes that no longer knew what they were waiting for. Everything replayed in fragments. The knock. The neighbor's smile. Lenny's eyes. 100 moments stitched together, but the thread had come loose. Then, the softest sound. A knock. 3 hesitant taps, like memory testing the air before returning. Come in, I said, though part of me hoped it was no one. The door creaked. Lenny stood there, not quite the boy I'd raised, not quite the man he was becoming. Shadows gathered on his shoulders, the kind that come from carrying too many unspoken words. He sat beside me, his posture careful, as though even the air between us might shatter if he moved too quickly. The silence pressed close again, not cruel, just thick. The kind of silence that asks questions without expecting answers. Mom, he said finally. His voice was thin, almost transparent. I don't know what's happening to us. His words drifted through me like a breeze through a house with open windows, soft, but shifting everything. I wanted to tell him that nothing was happening. That we were fine. That the world outside this room still existed, with its cold air, its coffee cups, It's routines that waited for us to return, but I couldn't lie anymore. We're just lost, I said. And it's okay to be lost sometimes. He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from holding too much inside. There was love in that tremor. And exhaustion. And a loneliness I recognized too well. When he finally looked up, I saw something in his eyes that frightened me, not because it was wrong, but because it was true. A reflection of myself. My doubts. My isolation mirrored back to me in a younger face, and for the first time, I realized what this distance between us really was: not danger, not desire, but the collision of two people who had no one else to carry their silence. We were both searching for warmth in the same cold place, and somehow mistook reflection for connection. The air grew still. The clock didn't tick, and time, once again, forgot to move. There are nights when silence sounds heavier than any word, nights when I can still feel the echo of his head on my shoulder, the warmth fading slowly into the cold air between us. I remember thinking then, this is not how it's supposed to feel. Comfort shouldn't tremble. Love shouldn't hesitate before touching. Time doesn't move straight anymore. It curls back on itself, rewinds, freezes, and suddenly I am there again, in that room with the cracked door and the half-light spilling through the blinds. Lenny sits beside me, fingers laced together, gaze nailed to the floor. He speaks in fragments. I don't know what to do with all these feelings. His voice is barely sound, just a fracture, a ripple through the space between us. Something in me splinters when he says it. Because I don't either. I don't know what to do with this closeness that feels both pure and forbidden, necessary and wrong. Earlier, or maybe later, I can't tell anymore. He had walked away, arms crossed, eyes hard, leaving the air thick with things unspoken. The sound of his door closing still feels like a small ending, a punctuation mark I refuse to read, and yet, here we are again, in the same silence. I remember thinking about the word complicated. People say it to disguise the truth when it's too sharp to name, but what we felt wasn't complicated. It was raw, unfiltered emotion, stripped of the safety of names. He looked at me with eyes that didn't belong to a child anymore, eyes that saw too much, eyes that made me ache, not from desire, but from the unbearable tenderness of knowing how easily love can get lost in translation. He leaned his head on my shoulder. A simple gesture. But it carried the ghost of every time he had done it before, when he was small, feverish, scared of thunderstorms. Back then, I never thought twice before holding him. Now, every breath felt measured, as though I might cross a line that had appeared silently between us. Still, I held him, because sometimes silence asks for nothing but presence, because love, real love, is sometimes a wound disguised as comfort. I told him we should step back, think, breathe, words that tasted like logic but felt like surrender. He nodded, slow, deliberate, as though trying to convince himself the world hadn't shifted beneath his feet, but his next words cracked the calm. Mom, I don't know what to do with all these feelings. And I, who had spent years mending others, holding strangers' pain in hospital rooms, suddenly found myself unable to heal this moment, because this wasn't pain. It was something nameless, hovering between confusion and closeness, between need and restraint. If you rearrange time, like shards of glass on a dark floor, you'd see it clearly. The moment before the door closed, the heartbeat of silence, the shoulder that became a confession, the echo of words that were never meant to exist. It doesn't flow because life didn't. It fractured. It circled. It breathed unevenly. I sometimes wonder what he remembers of that night. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, maybe the warmth, maybe the silence that felt too human to define, and I remember the weight of it all, the ache of wanting to protect what could never be protected from itself, the way his voice trembled when he said he couldn't ignore what he felt. That tremor still lives somewhere inside me, not as guilt, not as desire, but as an echo of something we never learned how to name. It was never just a knock. It was a rupture, the sound of reality reasserting itself. Before the sound, there had been only silence, dense, trembling, alive. His words still floated between us. Maybe we shouldn't push this, Mom. A plea. A warning. A mirror. And before that, there was his voice again, soft, breaking. I don't know what to do with all these feelings. Those feelings, that word. As though naming them might make them less dangerous, but they were already spilling, flooding the space, filling the air until every breath carried their taste. I remember standing by the door, or maybe I only dream I did, my hand pressed against the wood, the echo of the knock vibrating through my bones. Mark's voice seeped through like a calm after a storm. Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to check if everything was okay. How could I answer that? How could I explain that okay had become an unstable thing, a shifting horizon between two people afraid to look at each other too long? Lenny was watching us. I can still see it. That look. It wasn't anger or jealousy. It was searching. A quiet interrogation of my soul. His eyes were heavy with a truth he wasn't ready to speak, and I was terrified that Mark, kind, unsuspecting Mark, might somehow see it too. The room felt smaller with every second. The air grew thick, and I found my voice only as a tremor. Thanks, Mark. We're fine. Just having a quiet evening. The lie floated between us, light as smoke, but it stung when I breathed it in. Later, or perhaps earlier, I leaned against the door after it closed. Its soft click was the punctuation to everything unsaid. My heartbeat pulsed in my ears, counting time that didn't move. Behind me, Lenny hadn't left yet. He was still there, still silent, still seeing. It wasn't just a look. It was gravity. It pulled. It questioned. It knew. Maybe we shouldn't push this, he whispered. His voice trembled, but his words carried the weight of someone older, someone carrying too much, and I wanted to say something that would fix it, erase it, rewind it, but all I managed was a nod. A fragile acknowledgement of something neither of us wanted to define. Absolutely, Lenny, I said. The words felt rehearsed, like dialogue from a play I didn't audition for. We both need to think this through. We can't rush it. He stepped back, slowly, like he was afraid the air might shatter if he moved too quickly. Each step he took toward his room was a retreat, and yet, each one pulled at me, a string tightening in the silence. The house was quiet again, but the quiet was no longer peace. It was aftermath. It was confession turned into air. I sometimes wonder if Mark heard the silence after he left, the heavy, breathing quiet. If he paused on the other side of the wall, hand hovering over his own doorknob, and thought, something's not right in there. He would have been right, but not in the way he imagined. When I finally walked to my own room, I could still feel the ghost of Lenny's presence, his eyes, his voice, his restraint. It followed me like an echo through the hallway, filling the space with invisible weight. I sat on the edge of my bed and closed my eyes. The silence began again, the same silence that started before the knock, before the words, before the confession neither of us finished. A circle. A loop. A moment refusing to end. Some nights I still hear it, the knock that came too late, the breath I didn't take, the words he almost said. It all feels like a single heartbeat trapped in time, part warning, part prayer, part beginning of something that could never be named.